Nice. Send this to all
we
the
have
people.
One
viewer.
So far.
So
welcome to the first viewer. Okay, now it looks like we have a little bit more.
People on.
Wonder where everyone is actually watching from. I'd be curious.
California.
Yeah, if you're watching from somewhere and you want to let us know in the chat, let us know. It's always nice to hear where people are calling in from.
If we get Meltham on here.
A few more than one Los Angeles. Cool. Yeah, I'm not in LA right now, but I'm 2 hours away from LA. Where are you, Alex, again? Oh, you're in
I'm in a Boise,
Idaho?
Idaho suburb, temporarily. And yeah, trying to get myself down to Austin pretty soon.
Yeah. Cutting in and out, hopefully it stabilizes. It's fine on my end. Denver.
I can see everybody. Oh, I want to move over to the comments.
I want to visit Denver so bad. I want to visit Colorado in general so bad. I haven't been there yet. I've heard really cool things, that there's a lot of nature and stuff.
I got drafted by the Rockies, but I was never a big enough prospect to like actually go to the stadium. They gave me a plane ticket to Casper, Wyoming. They said, "Good luck, kid."
That's funny. Where else are people from?
This would actually be helpful from probably Intuit folks' diets. And you know what's interesting is I can look at someone's body and tell what they eat and telling how they train is not that challenging, but and it's actually easier with women.
In what sense?
Well, I think it's really easy to tell what women are over-indexing on cardio and what women are probably like plant-based predominantly, because you just look for a body that's like not fat but also doesn't have muscle definition.
Yeah.
And the most common way you get to be not fat with, like 20% or so body fat, but like not very much muscle definition is by doing a lot of cardio and not eating meat. And, like doing traditional stuff that you did for many years and probably most people do for some period of time.
And it's also funny. I follow a few people like the really hardcore carnivore people. I'm not sure if you follow Dr. Sean Baker and stuff.
I do follow him.
Yeah, he's hilarious. I mean, he's a little bit extreme, but like he'll post like progress pictures of people before they went vegan and then after they go vegan, and it's quite sad actually. How like over the course of many years they just like degrade into like skinny fat, scrawny, losing hair, nails brittle.
Yeah, how much of that is like real? Because it looks like those the meth timelines where it's like the first year on meth, the second year on meth, and by the time the person's like the fifth year on meth, it's just like the person's not recognizable. And you have to think like, if you took a picture of you and me at like the worst lighting, the worst angle, it's like you could probably make somebody look pretty bad.
Pretty bad, yeah, that's true.
Look kind of normal,
Yeah, I guess more in general, I think a more nuanced or realistic thing that happens, I've noticed, is I think people generally like veganism when they first go on it. They see like they feel lighter is a big thing. They don't have like the feeling of wanting to go to sleep after eating or slowing down because of eating. But then it kind of catches up to them after many years, like a couple of years, where I like the biggest thing for women is like brittle nails, losing hair, skin health starts to deteriorate. And it's just like so many things that happen. And then like they feel weak, and then like even their brain function starts to like decline.
Oh, for sure. For sure. So, when I was at Vanderbilt, because Vanderbilt's known for like good-looking girls, but then also it's known, I think, for eating disorders on some level. And so I could like just tell, being an athlete, because like as an athlete, you're evaluated like a racehorse all the time. So, first day on campus, shirts off, body fat's measured, and that's normal. And so you start to understand people's health markers much more deeply than most people will. And so if you apply the same, like visual observation to others as coaches and scouts do to you, you kind of realize like who's going down an unhealthy path And you can like look at people and you're like, yeah, that person's probably not eating enough.
Yeah.
Whether it's not eating meat or just like not eating. And yeah, it's I think those health markers are probably not noticeable to the people who are conveying them. And yeah, this is another one of those things where people have success for something with something for several months or maybe even like a year or two, and they can't get away from it. It's like they've gotten addicted to the first hit. It's like they won at the slot machine and they can't stop going back because they won the first time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that desire to grow once you find something that works is not common, I've noticed. People kind of find something that works for them, and then they just fail to evolve from it.
yeah,
And they kind of see, like, personally, I view diet and nutrition and health as like something that you evolve with throughout your lifetime.
right.
Like, you're not gonna find something that's perfect for every period in your life. You have
Yeah,
different needs at different times, and you grow as a human being, and so forth. And so, yeah, but I think that's a good jumping point into what we wanted to talk about, which is intuitive eating. I know that you're a huge, huge proponent of this, and you kind of talk a lot about this on Twitter and talk about how counting calories is a waste of time and that intuitive eating is a much better approach. But I think this idea that counting calories is a waste of time is starting to pick up more steam amongst like a lot of health fitness figures. But there's still people who truly believe that counting calories is useful, especially for cases where it's like, the physics of just losing weight. And so I kind of want to get into both, like, when it is and when it isn't useful. But maybe we can start off with you talking about how you discovered like why intuitive eating is just a better approach for you.
Yeah, definitely. So I counted calories when I was in college because our coach was, I love him, and he was, a little bit of a meathead. I'll say that out loud. Won't name him by name because it wasn't the head coach. So you kind of have to have some deep Vandy intel to know who exactly I'm talking about. But he kind of shared, how we should be eating, um, and so he wanted all of us eating more. Let me just tell Melton that she can come by. Okay. And so he all wanted us eating more, and I went on my recruiting trip, and um, I saw everybody was just jacked, like huge arms, abs everywhere. I'm like, man, I want to look like these guys. They were like 20, 21-year-old SEC athletes, and I was like 17. Naturally, I'm going to be smaller than them. And so I thought, okay, well, I need to eat a lot. And then I don't know how I decided I needed to eat a certain amount of calories every day, but that was what I decided I needed to do. And I had good success for a while. Common theme. And then I noticed that I was just kind of getting like a little bit softer. It seemed like I was getting a little bit softer. I wasn't testing my body fat. I was just like, it just seemed like I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to eat more, and which is the opposite of other people who are on calorie plans, but it's still a calorie-based system. I was putting pressure on myself to eat more because I thought if I didn't eat enough, I was going to lose weight. And I didn't want to lose weight because I needed to be strong for the season, and I need to be strong for our performance tests and all that stuff. And then maybe like I don't know exactly how maybe I just got lazy. Like a lot of my discoveries are from being lazy and noticing like actually I don't need to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think 1 year, 1 month, I'm just like, I'm just gonna eat when I'm hungry. And I noticed that when I ate when I was hungry, um, I got a lot leaner rather than eating according to a caloric plan. And the muscle that I gained was about the same. And so I thought, what am I even counting calories for if it's not really giving me much benefit? And and so for my entire fitness journey, like I really love eating. I had no intention of counting, weighing, measuring everything. And I just thought, like, what are the ways I can just make this thing that's hard for other people easier? And following my own bodily signals, because I knew as a baseball player, it was going to be impossible to succeed in it as an athlete if I couldn't trust my own body, if I couldn't trust my own intuition. And so I just like had this hypothesis where I just need to trust my own intuition. Fortunately, I wasn't loading up on sugars. I wasn't like in a super high stress job. And so my intuition was fairly well aligned with what it needed to be. It's almost like this narcissistic belief in yourself. Like, I'm good. I'm just going to roll with it and see what happens. And it worked. And, and then there's tweaks over time to kind of figure out like, how does it work even better? How's my hunger changing in response to various stimuli? How's it changing on off days versus on days? But basically I just played Jenga with my diet and stopped doing a lot of the things that, you're quote unquote supposed to do, and noticed that I didn't only get not worse results, I got better results doing it.
Interesting. Yeah, I think what's interesting is like we live in a very like calculated, scientific, measured era. So people always assume that the more you can measure, the better. And so, I mean, that's what I thought too, because, coming from like an engineering scientific background, it's like you want something more objective.
Right.
And so I myself started using calorie counting as a way to understand like how much I'm eating and kind of measure my caloric intake and stuff. And I think like in a lot of ways, it's the easier way to go about it, but not the most effective, because like I started doing that when I was like in my teens, but then that also put me out of touch with my intuition.
Right.
And like everyone has it. It's like to say that someone doesn't have good intuition, like it's not that you don't have intuition, it's that you haven't developed it yet. Like everyone has the capacity to develop that intuition. You just have to be a little bit open-minded and bold to like actually listen to your body.
Right.
And like bodily intelligence is not also not everyone has it, but you can't. It's not to say you can't develop it. I truly believe everyone can develop it if they want to. And so as easy as counting calories sounds, and it sounds more objective, you start to realize that like if you really want to optimize your physique, counting calories isn't really the right approach. Like, I mean, just think about it like from a common sense perspective, right? Were your grandparents counting calories? Like, no, they were eating intuitively, and like their generation was so much healthier than our generation is. And not to say that's like a direct correlation, but just I used to think about this because I would be counting calories. I'm like, I wonder how people back in the day did this. Like how do they know what to eat? And then you realize, like, and they knew because it was intuitive to them. They just followed their hunger cues, and especially if you start to eat like really nutritious food, you start to notice a difference in every little thing, your energy, your mood, like all of like how you feel on a day-to-day basis gets affected by what you eat and how much you eat, and the nutrients and the minerals that you get from your food. So if you're not able to be in tune with that, I think you're not really optimizing your diet at all, because then you're just basically functioning as a robot. For example, if I don't eat certain foods, like if I don't have steak, steak doesn't work for everyone, right? But for me, I eat steak basically every night. And if I don't eat steak for like probably 2 nights in a row, I will notice a difference. I will notice a difference in my mood, my energy, my workouts are not the same. I'm in a more like melancholy or even like depressed mood. It just has the effect of my entire body, and mental and physical. And so if you don't have that intuition, like I think like you're missing out in a big way.
Yeah, and so I've thought about this, and I hope this doesn't go over the heads of folks listening in. But prior to my present job at a cryptocurrency exchange, I was working with media companies at Google, and I was also doing strategy work at Google, trying to understand like the technology landscape. And I started thinking like, how do ideas spread? Because that's not something that people necessarily think that much of. Because why would you? You just kind of read what's in front of you and assume that it's true. But for whatever reason, I got down this kind of rabbit hole of thinking like, how do ideas spread? And the common denominator is the idea needs to be understood by a large audience. And so when you think about like different concepts that spread, math spreads because math is the same. 5 is 5 is 5 is 5. How does democracy spread? Well, it's because the idea that one person, one vote is very common. It's very easy to understand. You don't have to explain the nuances to people. And so simple ideas spread more easily. And I really think that that is one of the reasons why calorie counting has spread so pervasively. Number one, if you're to create a peer-reviewed, double-blind, peer-reviewed study, which is, I guess, considered like the gold standard or something for, real scientists, unlike bro scientists. And so if you create a double-blind, peer-reviewed study, you have to measure something. It's really hard to do a study around, well, we told 100 people to use their intuition and then we told 100 not to, because that's not double blind. You actually don't know which one you're in. You know which one you're in. So you cannot actually do a double blind study around intuitive eating. So number one, no matter how well this method works, you will never have a gold standard of science saying it works, because of the methods that are required for something to have the stamp of approval by the scientific community. Secondly, it's a lot easier to just measure things. It's like, well, we had 100 people and we put 50 of them on a 2,500 calorie diet. We put 50 of them on a 3,200 calorie diet. And the people on the 3,200 calorie diet gained approximately a quarter pound more per week. So it's easy for this quote unquote knowledge to be created, because it doesn't have the hurdles that the intuition based approaches take. And it's easier to explain to other people, because it's like, well, here, this is your allotment, do your allotment. And so it very much aligns with an industrialized manufacturing of information, manufacturing and distribution of information. The problem with it is twofold. Number one, it's false accuracy. You can't actually measure the calories that you're taking in, and you can't actually measure that the calories that you're burning. And let me get into that in greater detail. Number one, the FDA permits food companies to be off by up to 20% within their labeling and still be above board. Guess what? Some are actually off by more than 20%, and they get speeding tickets or something like that. But let's just say the average food that you consume is approximately 10% off on the calories that are listed. Okay, so number one, you're counting everything and you're being precise, but it doesn't matter because it's off by up to 20%, but probably about 10. Number two, the calories that you're burning. Well, how are you determining how many calories you're burning? You're looking at your Apple Watch. Your Apple Watch is just using equations that are based on assumptions. And those assumptions will probably take into account your heart rate, your maybe your height, your weight, your age, your sex, if you put that information in. Certainly online calculators take that information in. And then they will say, okay, so somebody with all of these characteristics will burn approximately this many calories at rest. Yeah. But that's actually not true, because if you get more precise when you measure it, like I did about a year ago, where I took a breathing test to see how many calories I was burning at rest. I was burning 2,600 calories at rest, doing nothing, like staying bedridden, even though if I went on an online calculator, it would say I was burning about 2,000 calories at rest based on my height, weight, age, sex, and lean mass. Furthermore, when the test that said I was burning 2,600 calories, that's what the test that said I'd burn 2,000 calories is based off of. But even the 2,600 calorie test is based on a ton of different assumptions, and they have to plot it out against a curve to see how accurate it is. And like realistically, if you want to understand how many calories you're burning, I don't even know how you can know, unless you're burning the food. You're actually burning samples of the food that you're eating, and you're not doing anything maybe, and then you're just like ingesting food where you can precisely determine how many calories are in it, and then you see how your weight changes, and like that shows you how many calories you're burning. Yeah. All of it is estimates upon estimates upon estimates. But because we have been bred to believe in numbers, if it's not numbers, it's not objective. It's like people just think if it's non-numerical, it doesn't make sense. But the reality is, if we know that your calories burned calculation is going to be off by probably around 10%, maybe more, in my case, 30%, and your calories consumed is going to be off by 20% or more sometimes, but say 10%. So between the two of them, there's a good chance that your estimates are going to be off by 15%. And so the reality is, it only makes sense to follow that approach if your intuition is off by a greater amount than that. And for a lot of people, their intuition can be developed to be more in line with like under a 15% margin of error, which is kind of what the guaranteed margin of error is when you do a calorie counting approach.
Yeah, and like I think to your point, Bitcoin JC says the same thing. He's saying we don't burn food, we ingest it. Oh, sorry, we don't burn food, we digest it. Calories is a flawed measurement of what goes on inside the body. Exactly what Alex is trying to say. It's like it's assumptions on upon assumptions on upon assumptions, and like I think like if you're going off of that, you're more likely to be wrong than if you spend a little bit more time developing your intuition, because your intuition, your bodily cues are not usually wrong. They can be wrong though if you've had chronically really fucked up diet and like you eat too much processed food, you have all these like fake sugars, and so if that's you, then yeah, perhaps your cues are wrong, but that can easily be fixed if you fix your diet and just spend a little bit time on developing those cues back again, because biology will always come back to what it should do if you just give it the right environment. And so yeah.
Yeah, and maybe would it make sense we get into that in a little greater detail? And I write about this in my first ebook that I put out, 10 Easy Wins for Easier Fat Loss. Like basically, a couple months after I met Preethi in Napa, though she didn't remember meeting me at the time.
I don't remember meeting you in Napa.
A couple months after that, because I tweeted about this earlier. Like her boyfriend Alexander was there, as well as Bobby Dino and Lattimore.
Oh, I remember. I think
You remember the event, you just don't remember
yeah.
like any interaction. And
Yeah.
and so what was I going to say? Oh yeah, so a couple months after that, as my account started growing, people started wondering like, what is this guy doing? Like, is there any like, do you have a website? I'm like, no, I don't have a website. Oh, let me put this book out. So I just brain dumped over like 3 hours. I just wrote out like 12 pages of this is actually how I approach every portion of my intuitive eating. And this is what I do to make sure that it's accurate. And this is how I adjust when I get off kilter, right? Because your intuition, like anything, if you're driving down the middle of the lane, sometimes you can veer off, and you need to figure out what you need to know if you're veering off so you can veer back on. One of the helpful things about having a leaner physique is it's very easy to notice very small changes in your body fat. So, if I'm normally like 5% body fat on calipers and I jump up to 5.2 in 1 week, I can notice that difference. Whereas if you're 20% and you jump up to 21% in a week, like you can't necessarily notice that difference. And so I'm the more success you have, the easier it is to notice when things are going wrong. And I kind of broke down like there's about a handful of things that you basically need to get right in order for your intuition to be in cue, at least from my experience. Here's what they are. And so that's on sale. Check it on my timeline if you want. But what I basically found out was, number one, you need to be hydrated, right? Because when you're not hydrated, you think you're hungry when you're not. You need to be sleeping enough, because when you're not sleeping enough, your hunger signals are all skewed. You need to have stress managed. If you're not managing your stress, for me, I don't eat enough. Some people eat too much carbs. Also, for me personally, I find that doing intense training helps manage my hunger appropriately. Where if I'm on an off week, sometimes I get hungrier for my off weeks than I do on my on weeks. And for whatever reason, if I'm training intensely, at least a few times per week, my hunger becomes appropriately moderated and I can eat more intuitively. And so, and also avoiding sugar, because the more sugar that you consume, or in Preethi and I's case, artificial sugar, the more off your intuition is. And so if you consider what most people do, because most people don't manage probably a majority of those, say, 5 things that I listed, it might actually be more sensible for those people to follow a calorie counting plan if they can. But if they can't do the 5 things that I just talked about, they also are going to have trouble following the calorie counting plan.
Yeah.
And so, it's not like intuition is just like, well, I'm just going to eat whatever I want. It's like, yeah, you need to manage the inputs so that what you want actually does align with what you need. And I think both Preethi and I have found that it can be done. And we want to share, exactly what it is we're doing in our self-monitoring that allows us to essentially, intuit our way to the appropriate amount of calories consumed in a more convenient way than counting calories, with superior results.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point of like measuring, calculating the inputs and making sure that those are the inputs that you actually want, you want and your body wants. Like you can eat a donut and you will want more of it and your body will want more of it. That doesn't mean that your body needs more of it, right? But you can also eat a piece of steak and you want more of it, but your body needs more of it. So how do we explain how a person would understand the difference between a craving for a donut versus a craving for a steak?
So what's really interesting is the more sugar you consume, the more you crave. And
Yeah.
so this is actually not directly answering your question, but I think a relevant aside is that one reason I hate calorie counting plans is if you've been allotted 2,500 calories and you're at 2,300 calories, what a lot of people will do is, oh, I'm just going to go eat I'll eat a cookie because I got that 200 calories, I can eat it. And in a calorie counting plan, the food that you eat doesn't influence your what you crave, because what you crave doesn't matter. You need to follow the calorie counting plan. Um, the reason why I think that's totally bogus is you're setting yourself up for disaster by rewarding yourself with a thing that's going to make you crave it more. And so for me, I don't really crave sugar that much. When I do, I eat a low sugar chocolate, or maybe like not artificially sweetened, like cane sugar sweetened yogurt. Sometimes I'll eat ice cream, when I have it at my house, but I usually don't have it at my house. And so sugar cravings are different, where if I go too low carb, I crave sugar. And so for me, a sugar craving is indicative that I'm not eating enough carbs in my regular meals. And I've had people in my 8-week challenge that I'm running right now, as well as the last one, mention to me, "Hey man, Alex, I'm restricting my carbs, but I'm just getting these like really bad sugar cravings. What do I do?" I'm like, "Oh, I think you're probably restricting your carbs too much.
Too
You might want to
much.
experiment having more." And this is all based on me assuming that my body knows when it's running low on glycogen. It knows when it needs more carbs. And if it's not getting those carbs from the regular meals, it's going to start saying, "Well, we got to get it somewhere. Sugar, 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 sugar."
Yep.
And so for me, if I'm craving a donut, it's because I'm not eating enough pasta. I'm not eating enough potatoes. I'm not eating enough rice. For other people, if they're craving a donut, it's probably because they had a donut yesterday and they've just developed the habit of consuming them on a regular basis. And so
Yep.
one of the most important things to be able to follow an intuitive eating plan is figuring out how to moderate sugar consumption to the point where I actually consume more calories as I was weaning myself off of sugar. Because what I did was, rather than put pure sugar, like pure M&Ms on my tongue, I would mix almonds in. And so on a calorie counting plan, that's a bad idea because you're eating more calories. But on an intuitive based plan, it's a good idea because I'm weaning myself off of the addiction to eating something super sweet. And I'm transitioning from eating something very sweet to slightly sweet to like not that sweet at all. And I can increase my sensitivity to sugar, which is another thing that people don't understand is you can make it. Sugar is like a drug. It's like drinking, it's like cocaine, it's like anything. The more you consume, the more you want. The less you consume, the less you need. And so you can end up being happier consuming a very small amount of processed sugar. Just like the guy who has 3 glasses of wine a week is probably happier than the person who has 60, right? Because he's enjoying it. He's not actually like consuming it out of addiction. And so, like, how do I know if I'm craving a donut versus like, I train my palate the way an athlete would train a free throw, where every meal I eat, the baseline is it's going to be protein dominant, maybe with a little bit of carbs, but every meal is going to be protein dominant. And if I don't know what I'm going to eat, it's going to be protein dominant. And I want to train myself that this is the normal meal that I eat, and any other meal is going to be a deviation off of that.
Yeah.
And once
Yeah,
you,
and especially when it comes to protein, I just want to interrupt there.
okay.
Like once you eat, once you go from, if you haven't been on a high protein diet, I noticed that once you go from low to moderate protein diet to high protein diet, it's really hard to go back to a low protein diet. Your body will know, you will know. I was reading something where they were saying that this mom of 3 and she has 3 kids, and the teenager is going through the teenage phase, and she'll be in these weird moods, and the mom will just take up like a whey protein shake up to her room and give her a protein shake and tell her, come out, you can only come out of the room after you finish it, 15 minutes after you finish it. And the kid just like, her mood just stabilizes. And so this is like once you realize how important protein is for just like stabilizing your mood, your energy, everything, it's really hard to go back. So like if you're so out of touch with your intuition, with your diet, just I highly recommend just trying like a high protein diet, because that will really help you build your intuition. Like you'll have a low protein meal and you'll be like, that didn't feel nourishing.
Yeah, so it's been several years since I actually haven't been eating the way that I've been eating. So it's so interesting to me that like the standard American diet, like people will go out and just eat a plate of pasta. I'm like, it doesn't make any sense to me. You're
Yeah.
supposed to put a lot of meat on that. And so for me, like, the other thing that happens with calorie counting plans is you have like cheat days or something like that. Like I don't have cheat meals. There's nothing in my diet that I'm not allowed to eat. It's just that the baseline needs to be protein dominant. So if I were to go eat a plate of pasta and it had less than a half pound of meat on it, I would consider that a cheat meal because it wasn't a protein dominant meal. And it doesn't even taste better than a plate of pasta that has like a pound
Yeah.
of meat on it. So like, why would I ever do that? I never do it because there's no
Yeah.
reason to. It doesn't taste better. But
Totally
most
agree.
most people, if they're going to eat at restaurants and stuff, restaurants are going to feed you carb dominant food because it's a high margin product. Costs like 50 cents to serve you a $12 plate of pasta, and every ounce of meat that they put on there is going to cost them $1. So they're going to try to put as little meat as they can to keep you happy-ish. Just give you a bunch of bread. People don't even realize that the way that they're being fed exists for the profit of other people. What you consider to be a normal meal has been constructed by someone who seeks to profit off of you. And so
Yep.
once you realize that, then you're like, well, why would I do that? I'm just gonna eat a bunch of meat or maybe not meat, it doesn't need to be meat, but I'm gonna eat protein dominant food because that aligns with my goals, and restaurants aren't gonna provide that for me. So I just need to do it for myself.
Yeah, exactly. I want to get to this question here, which is, I feel like counting is easier for maintaining. What if you're trying to gain weight?
Um, Calorie counting is easier for maintaining if you're trying to gain weight. Yeah, I mean, if I were to knock, one.
Basically, the follow-up question is any intuitive eating tips for gaining weight, basically?
Yeah, so that's a little bit easier. I can definitely go on that. And if anybody is to knock the dietary approach that I've personally taken, I've gained lean mass over the last several years. I've not gained a ton of lean mass over the last several years, and I think that's also how I structure my training.
Yep.
But I probably, if I really really wanted to bulk, I could probably gain 15 pounds. Zach Hummel thinks I could be 210, which would be 25 pounds more than I am. Maybe he's right. I mean, I have no interest in being 210, but or 200 for that matter. So intuitive eating tips for gaining. Number one, salt. If you're not salt sensitive, salt makes food taste better. And the better tasting food that you eat, the more you can eat. Crazy, huh? So one thing that I do is I only eat delicious meals. I tweet that. People might think I'm joking. I literally don't eat not delicious food. Like I maybe do like 1 out of every 10 meals. And I'm really, really angry about it. So 90+% of the food that I eat is delicious because it needs to be, or else I won't eat enough of it. And if I don't eat enough food, I will eventually get sick from the intensity of my training. So you really, really need to eat delicious food. My recipe book is great for that. Salt makes everything taste better. I really think that some of the studies, the anti-salt studies, probably conflate the difference between salt consumption and food consumption, or salt consumption and processed food consumption. So they think that people who are consuming a lot of salt are prone for a lot of bad things, but it's actually because processed food has a ton of sodium, or people who eat a lot of salt also eat a lot of regular food.
Yeah.
And so salt's one thing. The other thing is honey, local honey. Sugar tends to increase people's appetites for everything. Carbs do as well. So as much as I somewhat restrict the carbs that I have, depending on what my goals are, now I'm like somewhat constricted. If I'm trying to get super lean, I'll be a little bit more strict on that. But the more carbs you eat, typically the more everything else you can eat. So if I'm trying to, like, I would not be able to eat 20 ounces of steak on its own. But if you threw like some really good, really tasty carbs on the side, I could probably throw down 20 ounces of steak. And so if you understand that certain foods are multiplicative in what they do to your hunger, and other foods are subtractive in what they do to your hunger, you can essentially move the needle on a non-caloric based caloric plan. And so this is everything that I try to convey to other people, where if you're trying to eat more, but make it feel like it's the same. 3 levers to pull: natural sugar, salt, and carb consumption. All of those
Yeah.
3 things will make you consume more food.
Yeah, I 100% back that. I actually gained, actually a little over 10, almost 10, a little over 10 pounds, in the last 2.5 months,
What?
on
Damn,
purpose. Yeah, on purpose. Because I was getting a little bit too skinny, and
I'm going to a bro gym. That's what happens. You just
no,
ingest the
I actually put
steroids
on some
around
fat
you.
as well. I did put on some fat, but like I wanted to, because I didn't want to get like way too low body fat. It
Yeah.
started affecting my hormonal health, like I talked about. But for me, it was, I was still eating super healthy. I was just eating a lot more, and the things that worked for me are, I definitely increased my carb intake. So I 100% back that. For me, it was rice and sweet potatoes. Those don't go down so easy. Rice is so easy to go down, and it's such an easy way to put on weight and gives you good carbs as well. Honey was huge as well, and like, you don't want to consume so much honey, but like if you're working out, like pre or even post workout are great times to have honey, because your body's already burning all that sugar, so you're gonna need it to recover. So might as well give your body the honey when it needs it, rather than trying to eat it like late at night or something. Um, and then like, just, I put like extra oil, like olive oil and everything, just like, butter things up,
Yeah.
have a little bit more
Fat.
fat as well,
Tastes good.
and
You can eat
totally worked.
it. Yeah.
It wasn't that hard. And salt, of course. I've never limited salt. I think the whole like restrict salt, especially if you're working out, is weird. Because I find that my workouts are way worse if I don't have enough salt.
Yeah.
In fact, I do take salt tablets before working out, because it helps with my workouts. So definitely, I would not recommend restricting salt.
You know what? I don't know when I stopped doing it. I started doing it because Alexander mentioned it when we met in Napa, and it was giving me really good workouts. And I have no idea why I stopped doing it.
Yeah, they're
It
great.
probably
I honestly, I only need one or two. I have the bottle here. They're super. You can get them on Amazon.
you
It's called
take
salt.
salt tablets. I just pour salt in a bottle and drink it.
Yeah, I do that too, but these have like, they have potassium and blah blah blah. They have a few
I
other
take potassium too.
electrolytes, so I take it.
Yeah.
Okay. Can't you get too much protein? It's really, really hard for humans to get too much protein, because protein fills you up. So unless like you're really, really stuffing yourself with that much protein, like the whole myth about too much protein is 99.9% of the time it's not real.
Yeah. So I actually haven't researched this, just because like when I was a kid, my doctor said it was fine to take protein shakes. So I took them and never really thought it was going to be an issue. Um, I I took a blood test last year. That was when it told me my cholesterol was like awesome. But one thing that it showed was, I think, my uric acid, if I'm getting that name right, levels were higher than normal. But the doctor didn't actually mention it. I just looked at the sheet that they gave, and it showed where it was relative to the normal range. And so it was outside of the normal range, but not to the point where the doctor talked to me about it. And I think it's because the doctor knew I was training and like eating in that certain way, so she didn't think that it was like an issue.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I've dug into the research on this. Like, it's really hard to have like too much protein in your diet. Like, unless you're consuming like, 4 times your body weight worth of protein. Like, I think like, even like if you weigh like, 150, you can consume up to like 300 grams of protein and you'll be fine, more than
yeah.
fine, even more than that. So like, I highly doubt that you're having too much protein.
And so good markers to share is, I weigh about 185 pounds, and I'm probably consuming about 240 grams of protein a day. And if you're not eating likely meat dominant food every meal, you're not going to get 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, which is like kind of the gold standard bro science target for what folks say you should be hitting if you're looking to make gains.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that, right? Because most people aren't meatheads like us. And so they're like, oh, I'm taking a protein shake. Oh, I had some almonds. Oh, I had like steak at dinner. Like, that's high in protein. It's like, yeah, one of your meals had 6 ounces of steak. Okay, great. That's 40 grams of protein in that 6 ounces of steak that you had at dinner. You had 2 servings of almonds. Okay, that's like 12 grams of protein, 52. Oh, you had 2 eggs in the morning. Great, that's another 13. So you have 65. Then you had a protein shake. That's 25 grams. So you're at 90 grams. And then everything else that you ate has like 20.
Yeah.
Because if it's not protein dominant food, it tends to not really have any protein in it. Like if you have a slice of bread, it'll have like 2 grams of protein or something like that. So like if you're not eating protein dominant food every meal, you're probably not getting over 100 grams of protein every day.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. People often actually overestimate how much protein then they eat than underestimate. So I would say just don't worry about getting too much protein. Interested in your thoughts on intermittent fasting, any credibility for this fad? Yeah, we talked about this in the last one, but I will say my spiel and then I'll let Alex say his. And I'm going to speak specifically for women because I'm not a male and I don't really know. I know it works for some men, but personally, I've tried it twice actually now, experimented with it 2 years ago and then again more recently. And I found it doesn't work for me and my body. I've noticed that it definitely affects my hormonal health. If I fast for extended periods of time, and there's studies showing that when you fast, your hormones kind of bottom out, but they come back up, they rebound after you start eating again. But for me, like I don't want, I'm in my reproductive age, so I don't want my hormones to be going up and down all the time from all this intermittent fasting. I kind of want my hormones to stay stable, so that's why I don't fast. And also, I just noticed that my moods are better if I just have my blood sugar be kind of stable throughout the day rather than having like fasting until like 2 or 3 p.m. and then eating and then having a spike in blood sugar, blah blah blah. If I just keep it steady throughout the day, I just notice my moods are better, and I just feel better. I have more energy. And so I don't do it, but I know that it works for a lot of people, especially men, I've noticed. And it does work for some women who are a little bit older. So I've noticed that women who are not in their reproductive age, so like older than 50, often find a lot of success in intermittent fasting because they're not as worried about their hormonal health at that age. So I would say it's very dependent on the body and the situation. And also, if you're an athlete, you probably don't want to be intermittent fasting. And like, if you're a serious athlete, like if you're training like a couple times a week, then sure. But like, if you're super serious about your training and you're like, if your body is in constant repair mode almost because you're constantly training, then I'm not sure you're gaining much by intermittent fast in doing doing intermittent fasting. You might even be losing a little bit because you're not giving your body the fuel it needs all day to heal and recover.
Yeah. So my take on it is I believe the most effective, sustainable approach to dieting, if it can be achieved, is a pure intuition based approach. But I understand that that is not possible for everybody. And so, one area, so it's much easier to eat intuitively when you live alone or perhaps just with like a significant other. Once you start mixing in kids and other family members in the situation, and your meal times aren't determined by you and your own body clock, but they're more based on what other people are feeling or the convenience of other people, then it becomes much more challenging to eat intuitively because you're not eating according to your own bodily signals. And so I think these types of approaches, whether it's an intermittent fasting approach, whether it's a calorie counting approach, are suitable when you cannot listen to your own intuition. And so a personal example is I was with my ex-girlfriend's family last winter break. And I don't even know what year it is right now. I don't know if this is 2019.
2021.
Was it 2019 then?
Oh,
Yeah. So
okay.
it would have been 2019. Yeah, 13 months ago. Not 1 month ago, but like 13 months ago, I was with her family. And we were eating on the schedules of many people. It wasn't just whenever Alex was hungry. And I noticed I was just eating too much. Like I'm like, because I didn't know when my next meal was going to be. So I'm like, well, I might as well just eat more. And then after doing that for several days, I thought, okay, I don't intermittent fast now, but if I had a family and I had to start adopting an alternative meal plan, then that might be something that I would consider. And so, I think the devil's always going to be in the details, right?
Yeah.
Where, people will say, well, calorie counting worked for me. It's like, yeah, obviously it doesn't not work for people who it works for, but you got to realize, like, which bucket are you in? Are you in a job that's so stressful that your hormones are, going up and down, and you can't actually trust your intuition? All right. Well, if that's the case, then maybe it does make sense to try a more constrictive approach, because you can't trust yourself, and that. But if you can trust yourself and you're able to develop your intuition, I think that that's just the easiest, most sustainable way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And like one last point I'll make is like, you know, I take like 1 or 2 days off from training a week, and I'll notice that on those days, you're just naturally a little bit less hungry. Depends. Sometimes I'm more hungry because I'm still recovering from the training days,
I'm
but
more hungry on my off
yeah,
days.
a lot of people are. It depends. But sometimes I'm less hungry. Or I can go until a longer period of time, like maybe 16 hours before I eat my next meal. So like that's the only time I might fast like a little bit. Otherwise I will not do IF. Um, Thoughts on eating post workout is I intermittent fast, so I typically don't eat until about 6 hours.
So I do eat right after I work out. I try to. I'm not always good about that. And I know
Yeah,
so a lot of the science that I go off of may be debunked. I don't really know. When I was in college, we were told to eat within, ideally within 30 minutes, but no more than 2 hours from when we trained, because that is the quote unquote anabolic stage. I've also heard some people who were not dumb say that that's BS. I don't know, and I'm hungry after I eat, so I just eat right after I eat. I mean, right after I train. It doesn't need to necessarily be within 30 minutes, but I do eat within a couple hours of when I
yeah,
train, and it's been a habit. I don't have experience not doing it, so I can't speak to not doing it.
yeah.
I can just tell you that I've been doing it for years.
Yeah, I used to be this on this bucket of not eating right away after eating. I mean, not right away after training. And you can do it because your body will always adapt to the situation you give it. Like, but you don't know what you're missing out on, right? So it wasn't until I started eating post workout. So I usually eat within an hour or two as well. I also eat right before my training, so that way I'm not like I don't have to like rush home to eat or something. I still have a little bit of a buffer. So I noticed that my gains are a lot better, and my recovery is a lot better. My sleep's a lot better if I eat within 2 hours. So you don't. So to answer your question, I would say I think you're asking whether you're sort of missing out on something. Um, I would say that if you don't know, then you can try to just for 2 weeks experiment on your own body and eat right after working out and see how that makes you feel. See if you recover better, you have more energy, and that's the only way to know, because otherwise you don't know what you're kind of leaving on the table.
And see how your workouts do, right?
Yeah,
Like, I tell people in my challenge group, you judge your diet by your training. And if your
yep,
training is getting better, you're probably doing something right. It's really hard to sustain high quality training if you're like nutritionally deficient, right? And so, my parent, because I don't eat that many vegetables, my parents are always like, well, we're worried about this and that. I'm like, do you realize how hard it is to do some of the training that I'm doing? Like, if I had a nutritional deficiency, I would know way earlier than somebody who's just sitting at a desk all day. And so, one of the things you can do is you can try eating right after for a couple weeks to see how your recovery goes. I mean, you,
yep,
you can't get that much worse in 2 weeks. Just change, I'm just going to eat right after and 6 hours later. Like if you gain a half a pound of fat and then you stop doing it for 2 weeks, you'll lose that half a pound of fat. So it's totally worth experimenting. And I wish that I did it sooner. I'm sure Preeti wishes that she did too. But a
yeah,
lot of the ways that I've discovered some of these things are just from experimentation
yeah.
and just
That's the
getting off
key.
of like staying on the same path.
Yeah, that's the key. And it's hard because like I think it's easier to stay in a comfortable situation of what you already know and what you feel comfortable with. But you'll never know what you might be missing out on if you're not willing to kind of experiment. And like I myself sometimes, like, I get really comfortable in my schedule or my routine, and then I don't want to try new things. But the way I've kind of overcome that fear is by kind of boxing the experiment, and allowing myself like X number of days or weeks to run this experiment, so that like I know that, because like I don't know if this happens to you, Alex, but like when I'm experimenting with things, like the initial few days are a little bit chaotic, because our brain gets so used to this flow state that we're in with our schedule of doing the same thing every day, and following a certain routine, that when you try to experiment with stuff, it can feel a little bit chaotic. And so and that's normal. And so I would say just like box your experiments into that. So when you feel that sense of like anxiety or chaos in your day, you can realize like, oh, this is like an experiment and running. Let's see how it goes.
I'm a little bit different in that, because almost all my experiments involve making it easier. I'm like, what would happen if I didn't try hard at this thing? Oh, nothing. Great. Oh, my results are better. Great. And so, I don't know if you have anxiety that leads you to not eat for 6 hours, right? And so one way to make that easier is to say, well, I just don't have to do that. Fuck it. I'm just going to try not doing it. And so that can be one way that you can tackle, the anxiety that would come with going through a process change. Is you're like, I'm just not going to work that hard. We'll see what happens. And it might work.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes like not working as hard is harder than
It is.
working hard.
This is what I tell some of the people in my fitness challenge. I'm like, depending on who you are, you need to define discipline specific to you. So for 95% of people, discipline means doing something more consistently over and over again. But for the 5% of people who take that a little bit too literally, discipline means having the discipline to not do that thing.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah, and this is hard, because I think I tweeted the other day, it's like smart people will dismiss like the more effective solutions because they sound too easy to be true.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of those people. It's almost like I'm addicted to hard work or something.
No, it's bad, but it's true. And
Yeah.
I've gone through it myself, right? So because nobody was following me 10 years ago when I was going through, my workouts were way harder when I was fat,
Yeah.
right? And like people, they just see me now, I'm in good shape. They just kind of figure, oh, his genetics are really good. Oh, I can't do that. Like, oh, he was a pro athlete, whatever. It's like, yeah, I was an ex-pro athlete 7 years ago too, and I was like fat, and my workouts were really hard. And you guys can see my before pictures then. And I was really paranoid about like, oh, I don't ever want to miss a day. I don't want to like take time off. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I want to just be punctual, blah, blah, blah. Didn't get me anywhere, right? It probably just wore my body down. I probably took years out of my gym career from not taking off days, right? And that hurts me looking back. I'm like, man, if I just slept in a couple more days a week and like not tried as hard, I would be better. But the reality is, if you want to figure out the optimal training, you're going to overdo it at some point. You just need to understand when and how to course correct. And this is why I love athletic-based training compared to aesthetic-based training, is because athletic-based training has a benchmark. There is a barometer where you can understand if you are getting better. Whereas aesthetic-based training, when you're maximizing time under tension, number one, it's more painful. You don't get the dopamine from hitting PRs, and you don't have as much of your interaction with your body telling if you're going in the right direction, because you're only assessing your workout by like how painful it was. And so it's like, how do I know if it was like more painful than the last one? Like, I don't know. Is it getting better? Is the pain getting better? But if you're lifting heavier weights than you did last week, if you're doing conditioning harder, faster than you did it last week. And so it's just the easiest way to get a good physique is to just train for athleticism, because you get so much more comprehensive signals for if every other thing in your life is going in the right direction or not.
Yeah, and like you also start to become a little bit more streamlined with your workouts, because like once you experience that, like you said, the dopamine hit of hitting a PR and seeing progress, you'll know when you have a workout that felt like a waste of time. you'll know the difference, and that's a good feeling, I think, where you're going into every workout knowing that like you're on this path upwards rather than just like moving for the sake of moving, if that makes sense.
JR, what state do you live in? Do you live in California, JR? Good answer. I'll answer that question, but I think he lives in California. Yeah. So might be a surprise to folks who are in lockdown states, but not every state is locked down. So this is interesting because I am from California, and so like my dad still lives there, and it's like my gym's open. I go there. There's 50 people, 50 high school bros lifting with poor form, making funny jokes that I think because I still have high school sense of humor. So I don't run on concrete. I run either on the treadmill or on a track. I only run once a week now because of all the powerlifting that I'm doing. I used to run, I used to run 5 days a week, and then I dropped that down to 2 times a week, mixing in assault biking. But then with the powerlifting that I'm doing, when I'm doing like squats in the mid 300s, working sets in the mid 300s, and then deadlift working sets in the mid 400s, that just gives me a lot of joint compression. And so I can't be running like multiple times a week and doing that powerlifting if I want knee cartilage when I'm 40. And so I am careful about that. And I make sure I warm up. And I do it on a treadmill. Treadmill doesn't bother me. I do it on an incline. I find that running on an incline, I'm guessing just because of the shorter distance between your stride and when you hit the ground, it doesn't bother my knees as much running on an incline. So you might, consider trying running on an incline if your knees normally hurt when you run.
And plus, like I think we talked about last time, like when you're on a treadmill, you usually put it on 3% incline just to mimic the same feeling.
Resistance.
Yeah. Same resistance. Cool. Any other? Okay, so there was another guy who said he hit 4.
Nice. How's the physique doing? Because we know I tweeted yesterday that every 10 to 15 seconds you can drop from your mile time should correspond to about 1% body fat drop. This was sample size of 1. But I just kind of assumed.
No, but I mean, like everything in fitness and nutrition is a sample size of 1. Most things, I think, like not everything works for every single person.
And so this is going to be this is going to be individual to individual, right? So if my mile time is something and another person's mile time is the same, that doesn't mean that we two are going to have the same body composition. But generally speaking, if you personally improve your mile time by a minute, your body fat will probably go down by about 5%. So that's what I meant by that comment. Like, I don't, because obviously, Arnold Schwarzenegger was not running 3-minute miles. And Ronnie Coleman could not run a 4-minute mile. So like, clearly you can't compare, people horizontally like that. It's per the individual.
Yeah, that's true. I do want to touch on one last thing. So I kind of want to talk about whether calorie counting when calorie counting is useful.
Yeah.
Because it's not, like we kind of talked about it a little bit where we said calorie counting is useful, but we didn't really expand where it could be useful. So one example where I think it's useful is if you have, like, I've noticed that people have really, really poor understanding of nutrition and like how many calories could be in a thing. So they might look like at a Starbucks drink and assume it has 50 calories. And then they might look at a steak and think it has like 2,000 calories. Like, it's just like the way their whole like mental model of food and nutrition is so fucked up. Where I think sometimes counting calories could be a good way just to get like a rough ballpark of building that intuition around calories, not to lose weight, but just to build your intuition around like how much calories each thing has.
Yeah.
Because then you start to understand, like, okay, like if I go to Starbucks and have this drink, you might underestimate how many calories are in there, and that's not good, right? So.
Yeah, so I think a couple different ways to look at it. Number one, is estimating calories important? Yeah, but I think it's actually more important to be able to estimate macros. And my personal experience is I don't track fat. I don't actually care how much fat I eat. I eat according to the taste. If
Yep.
I'm craving a lot of fat, it's probably because my body needs more calories, so I just eat more fat. It counts as 0 for me. So the only macros that I track is I want to make sure that I'm usually having over a gram of protein per pound of body weight. That doesn't mean I have to do it every day. If I'm just not hungry some days, I'll have 0.8, 0.9 grams. It's fine. I'm not gonna force feed myself. And if I'm super hungry, I will continue eating till I'm eating 300 grams a day. For carbs, kind of the same thing. I generally want to have about, and I don't go by grams because you don't eat things in grams. You eat things in bread slices. You eat things in cups of rice. So the way I do it is, generally speaking, I'll want to have like 8 or 9 servings of carbs per day. Pasta will count for more just because it is very dense, calorically dense. And so, 8 or 9 servings a day. A bagel is going to count as 2.5 because you just look at the amount of like the calories in it. It's not, each half of a bagel is over a slice of bread. But it all comes down to like the number of servings of bread that something would equate to. And I also try to limit processed sugar. So if you go to Starbucks and all you do at Starbucks is not consume processed sugar, you're probably not going to have anything that has a lot of calories in it because most of the calories in Starbucks food is processed sugar, or it's going to end up being like milk fat, which I don't consume a ton of milk, so I wouldn't have that anyway. But according to the diet framework that I do follow, it counts as 0 because I just have fat. It's whatever it is. I want to be cognizant of carbs that I'm consuming. I don't want to have a ton of processed sugar. And, I basically, if I'm really craving carbs, it's probably because I need them. And so I'm okay having over 10, 12, maybe 15 servings a day. But generally speaking, if I'm not super hungry, I want to have like under 10 servings of carbs a day and, at least a gram of protein per pound. And it does help to be able to just look at something and know what it is, right? I know I had 20 ounces of steak between lunch and now. I know that's going to be, according to the label that I have, which we know can be inaccurate, it's about 110 grams of protein. I know I had 4 eggs and 2 pieces of bacon for breakfast. That's going to be about 25 grams of protein. I know I know I'm going to have a baked pasta for dinner with some scallops. I know if I'm going to have 8 scallops, that's going to be about 36 grams of protein. And if I have, a third of a box of pasta, that's going to be about 17 grams of protein. If I have like 3 pieces of cheese on that, it's going to be about another 18. So my dinner might be 70 grams of protein between those two. And so, Dulab mentioned, about me being Rain Man the other day. And I do think that having that Rain Man level ability to just look at something and know what the macros of it are certainly do make it easier for me to follow an intuition-based plan that still has some sort of metrics that it's being, stabilized against.
Yeah.
I forget what
I totally agree. I think I totally agree. Being able to intuitively count macros is probably way more important than calories. That's a good way to put it. And it's not that hard. I've noticed, I think, and this goes into the next question, which is, do you use a food scale to start, and do you still use a scale? I've never really used a food scale because it's too much work. But I know that some people do find it useful. If your intuition is so off and you don't just trust yourself that way, go for it. Just use a scale. But I think you don't need it.
I've never used one.
Yeah.
When you buy food, it has a weight on it. So, unless you're buying like a cow leg, right? You don't know, I trust that the 10 ounces of steak that I buy from the store that's weighed by the butcher or something is 10 ounces. I'm not going to second guess I guess they could be cheating. It's possible. There's a lot of food fraud out there. So I don't weigh it. Never did. Yeah. So.
It kind of goes against, I guess, the intuitive eating stuff. If you're always measuring something with a scale. It could be useful to start, but I would say wean off of it and just try to use your intuition.
So a good point that we can convey directly is being incredibly meticulous about weighing your food and counting your calories is like being incredibly meticulous about getting promoted at your own company, at the company that you work for. Meaning, you will be very good up into a certain threshold. But if you want to have excellent results, you're not going to have it following that path, almost certainly, because of the inaccuracies that we mentioned earlier around knowing how many calories you burn and actually knowing that the food you're measuring has a certain amount of calories, because food has different densities. So just because you weight it as something doesn't mean that each grain of rice is going to have a different density. It's going to have a different water composition. And so unless you're actually burning your food and like measuring the output like that, you can't actually know the true calories in it. And so there's a threshold to what benefit that can give you. And probably people who are like good students and just like following templated plans and can do that to a T, maybe a little bit, OCD about following plans that others have given them. They tend to kind of go down that rabbit hole. But again, there is a threshold that is not going to be crossed by following this type of approach to a T.
Yeah, it's kind of like a good, what this reminds me of is like, when you think of some of the best chefs, they're not sitting there measuring everything on a scale. They kind of intuitively know how much spices to put in something, or how much flour to put in something, how much water to put in. Like if you actually watch like really, really good ones, like the more like commercialized ones are actually not that good in my opinion, but the kind of traditional chefs, like your grandma didn't fucking use a scale to like measure stuff, right? She just intuitively knew. So I would say the same thing with our bodies. Like the more in touch we are with our bodies, the more intuitively we know what to put into it.
Yeah. And JR Wana mentioned you bought my masterclass. Good job. I recommend that for everybody. And one thing, when I wrote the recipe book, to Preethi's point, I didn't actually know how I cooked my food. I just cooked it. And I had to go through all the things that I was cooking and be like, 5 minutes? Okay. Sounds about right.
That's right.
2 cloves of garlic? Yeah, why not? Like, I don't cook according to recipes. I cook
and it's
according
more
to
fun
feel.
that way. It's more fun that way, because then you can kind of adjust it to your palate and what you prefer. Right? Some people like more salt, some people like more pepper, some people like it this way, that way.
Right.
So,
and think about recipes as actually a great model for understanding why so many people count calories. It's so much easier for me to convey to somebody who hasn't met me how to cook a food if I just list, use this much, do this much time at this temperature, then it's done. But like, that's not actually going to give you the 100% transfer of how I do it. What's going to allow you to do it the best is actually teaching you, this is how you get food crispy. And this is how, so this is actually a lot of concepts that are in both my masterclass and in my recipes. Is if you actually study them, you'll notice that I don't actually know how to do very many things. I just know how to apply similar frameworks to a lot of different things. So I know how to get food crispy, right? I know that if I want to get my scallops crispy, which I'm cooking later tonight, I need them to be dehydrated. Otherwise, they cannot get crispy in a pan. I know that's the same thing with my calamari. If there's too much water, same thing with octopus. I cannot get it crispy if there's too much water in the pan. So this is what I do to get it uncrispy. For years, I only cooked my food on one setting, high. I literally, all the food that I cooked was in a skillet on high, and then I baked stuff also. 2 things. And I just learned, like, I can just sear the edges, make it good. Okay, that's fine. Once you realize you can apply these basic concepts to like every different thing, which is what I try to teach in my masterclass, you don't actually need to know how to cook. You don't need to go through 7 different sets of instructions to cook different foods. Like if I see an interesting food at the store that I've never bought before, like an exotic meat, I'm like, oh, I'll buy it. Do I look up recipes for it? Nope. I just throw it on. I'm like, well, this is how food gets crispy. Put the cold thing on the hot thing till it's like nice on the edges, and then you throw some salt on there and it tastes good and it works.
Yeah. And like, I lost my train of thought while you were talking about that. But we'll go to the next comment, and then I'll come back to what I was thinking. I was surprised nuts and almond butter is 200 calories. I can eat a candy bar for that much, but society is good. I eat a lot of nut butters myself. I am a nut butter addict. And yeah, they're to me, like, the reason I love nut butter is because I can stay not hungry for a few hours between meals. So I'll usually have nut butter at the end of a meal, and then I won't be hungry until the next meal. And I just prefer not to snack too much. So nut butters are great. Like, they're just like so satisfying. um, but yeah, they are very caloric, and so if you're not trying, yeah, if you're trying to cut or get lean or something, be pretty careful with nut butters because you can definitely have too much.
I used to eat them all the time. Forever, I heard there may have been some like anti-nutrients in those. So I stopped eating them like last year. I don't know if I necessarily feel any better or worse, but they're really tasty. You know,
Yeah,
almond
yeah,
butter, cashew butter, hazelnut butter.
yeah. I
Uh,
basically have, like, I've tried every fucking nut butter in the world. I continue to find new ones. So like I will try the most like rare things in the world. They're good. But yeah, highly caloric. If you're worried about that, I would just say stick to regular nuts because then like you have a better understanding of how much nuts you're eating, rather than nut butter, which can be deceiving.
yeah, I mean, you know, one thing that Preeti and I talked about earlier, to try to maximize the allowable margin for error that you have with things like these,
Yeah.
is the stronger you are, the less this matters. And so, like, if you can squat 400 pounds, it doesn't matter if you're like, it doesn't good. It's 200 calories, 400 calories, 100 calories. Like, your body needs the energy. And so, you know, that's the thing that a lot of people are missing who are meticulously counting calories. They haven't created a powerful enough engine in their body to enable any degree of margin for error. If I overeat, I'm just going to have a badass workout tomorrow. It doesn't really matter that much. But if I didn't have the strength that I have and I overate the same amount, I wouldn't necessarily be able to utilize that excess fuel. And so then it would actually, you know, be a problem. And so there's a couple different ways you can address it. And I just found that the easiest way was to train like an athlete so I could get strong. And it found all this stuff doesn't matter. These details
Yeah,
don't matter.
that's a really good point. Because like think about college athletes, for example. They're not like they have they overeat, they undereat, they do all kinds of crazy shit, but their bodies kind of maintains the same level of physique. And it's because their body needs that nutrition. And yeah, like I even watch my boyfriend Alexander, like he'll have sometimes 2,000, 3,000 calorie meals, and
Here's a
like,
3,000 calorie meal. Man,
oh yeah, like
we got to get together for an eating challenge one of these days.
he can eat a lot. But he's never like stressed out about it. He's not like feeling guilty. If anything, he'll just use that fuel for his next day's workout. So yeah, you're absolutely right in that, like, once you're training hard enough, it really doesn't matter.
He also fasts too. I'm gonna say he's cheating because he hasn't been eating for many hours, and so he just has that surplus. I'll throw down 2,000 calories after a leg day, no problem. You know,
Yeah.
and to the point where I'll cook baked pasta tonight because if you're bulking, baked pasta is like a really easy way to ingest like 700 calories. I'm doing leg day tomorrow, and so leg day tomorrow's the most physiologically intensive day that I have. And so guess what? I'm gonna need to eat a lot of food. I already had 20 ounces of steak today. I'm gonna have a baked pasta. I'm gonna have some scallops. I'll have probably close to 4,000 calories on the day. And if I don't have that, like a couple weeks ago, I just got lazy and I wasn't eating as much, and I justified it to myself like it was fine. It wasn't fine. My workouts were so hard. I like dreaded them, and I'm like, what is going on? Like, why is this happening? Oh, I'm not eating enough. I'm not eating to the point where I'm no longer hungry at all.
Yeah.
So I need to eat like that.
Yeah. Okay. Any recommendations on at-home exercises for us in places where the gyms are still closed? Tough one.
I can jump in there. So there's a
Yeah.
couple people online who have really good guides. Jerry Teixeira, Zach Hommel, Jack Carlson have good, body weight guides. I'm not a body weight expert. What I would say is there's a number of different things that you can make any exercise more challenging. So You can change a bipedal exercise into a single jointed or single limb exercise. So, instead of doing a body weight squat, you can do a Bulgarian split squat. So you're putting all of your weight on one limb instead of two, right? You double the resistance that you're adding. Number two, backpacks. Most people have backpacks. Very few people realize if you put books in the backpack, while it might be inconvenient walking down the street, it's actually very helpful if you're trying to add resistance to at-home training. So do that. You can also throw it on the front because that is going to, it just puts more stress on your body than putting it on the back. The same way you can't front squat as much as you can back squat. So if you wear your backpack on your front, provided that it's not getting in the way of you doing your movement, it should add resistance. And then the other thing that you can do, bands are good. You can do hamstring curls with bands, a lot of different movements with bands. If you slow the eccentric portion of your movement, so the concentric portion is like when you're doing something. When you're doing something, the eccentric portion is like when you're going down. If you slow the eccentric portion of the movement, it's a lot harder. It puts less stress on your joints, and it can make an exercise that otherwise doesn't have a ton of resistance be a lot more challenging.
Yeah, and I'll post a few links. Even if you go on YouTube, there's a lot of good resources that have really great workouts. So like AthleanX has a few YouTube videos that talk about home workouts. I love the AthleanX channel on YouTube. If you don't already follow it, highly recommend Jeff Cavallari. And then who's the other guy, the Australian guy that's like super calisthenic dude? I don't know if you know him.
Calisthenics, I don't follow calisthenic people.
You don't? Come on.
It's too hard.
Yeah, but yeah, there's a lot of resources on YouTube. I think the options are definitely there. What I did when I was at home in New Jersey was I just bought, I don't know, honestly, the dumbbells on Amazon were super sold out, but I was able to grab like I think 5 or 6 different sets of dumbbells, different weights, and that was more than enough for me. That and bands. And I bought a little mini treadmill that cost like $300. It was pretty crappy. Yeah, it was a pretty crappy. It was not
catch on fire.
Yeah, seriously. No, it was so hilarious. It looked like a little baby treadmill, but it did the job. It worked for 2 or 3 months, and I was able to go on little like sprints on it. So
that's cool.
You can always find a way.
Just gotta want to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff, the more open you are to experimentation, the more you'll like stumble across these things being, you'll find that the longer you do it, the easier it is, provided your body doesn't break down, which makes it harder. But yeah, it's like.
Do you want to say hi to Alexander?
Oh, Preethi says you can out-eat me, and I don't know that is true.
Actually, there were some places for the gyms to close. Calisthenics. Calisthenics are your friend.
Yeah.
I'm gonna shower.
All right, he's gonna shower.
Why is he wearing a shirt? Obviously, he's wearing a wife beater.
Yeah, he always wears one because yeah. Anyways, any other question? Ajax in the room. Yep, it's Ajax in the room.
Branding's good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Let's see. I don't think there's any more questions.
Yeah, we can bounce on that. Thank everybody. Thank you everybody for tuning in.
Yeah, that was really fun.
It's fun. Hopefully it's fun for everybody else.
Yeah.
I'll post all the highlights over the next week or so. We'll know that this is not the last one. This is this one. So if you want to check it out again, you'll see it on our timelines. But thanks for tuning in.
Yeah. Awesome. Bye, guys.